Hello, and thank you for watching this regional forecast for the Corn Belt. I'm Andrew Pritchard, Senior Meteorologist with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Temperatures across the region here at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning already very warm and muggy across much of the Corn Belt, 60s and 70s. Across the region, you have to head all the way into North Dakota, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin to find some mid-50s here on Tuesday morning. Pretty quiet across the Corn Belt as well. We've got some thunderstorm clusters across the far northern plains moving out of eastern Montana into western North Dakota, far northwestern South Dakota, but otherwise a pretty quiet morning. Going to be a lot of sunshine across the Corn Belt today where we experience those warmer temperatures. A look at the radar here at 5 o'clock this morning. Again, those thunderstorm clusters across the far northern plains. It's across this region, though, we'll watch for those thunderstorms to re-erupt as we head into the afternoon and evening hours. An enhanced risk for severe weather across portions of Minnesota, Iowa, and central Wisconsin today. The greatest threat going to be damaging winds with clusters of storms, but some of the first storms that pop up could produce an isolated tornado or maybe some hail across that region. As we head into the day on Wednesday, that severe weather threat shifts a bit to the south, cut across the northern plains down into the central plains, and then eastward from Minnesota or Missouri across central Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and then all the way off into the northeast and the mid-Atlantic. So get into Thursday here, bottom center, that severe weather threat going to be greatest across the central plains, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, down into the Kansas City area, talking about the threat for supercells producing large hail, a couple tornadoes, and maybe some damaging winds once again. Now, the upper level pattern as we get started here on Tuesday morning features a big ridge across the region. That's the reason for the heat expanding across the Corn Belt. But as we head into the middle part of the week, Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to see this ridge flatten out just a bit, such that we've kind of got zonal flow going across the northern plains, parts of the upper Midwest, with shortwave troughs embedded with that little kind of shortwave, smaller patches of stronger winds embedded within the flow. You can see one right here. And each one of these is going to bring kind of an enhanced risk for some thunderstorm activity and tapping into this very warm, hot, and humid air mass, the potential for some severe weather and maybe some heavy rain with some of these thunderstorms. So we'll take it into the weekend, getting into Thursday, Friday, now getting into Saturday, and you're starting to see a bit of a change here. Once again, we're seeing this ridge kind of redevelop across the region, but you're seeing a much more powerful system trying to make its way across the west, a much more powerful upper level wave here as we head into the weekend. It's trying to be an instigator for some more robust severe weather threat as we head into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday across the northern plains. We've got quite a wild card, though, across the Gulf of Mexico, Tropical Depression number 3, and it looks like it wants to kind of sit across the Gulf over the weekend before slowly making its way northward, potentially into the central and eastern Corn Belt as we head into the early part of next week, and that would certainly bring kind of a pattern-defying rain to that region. Again, an upper-level pattern like this with a big ridge across the midsection of the country. This should be a very dry pattern across this corridor, but that would be a potential wild card here as we head into early next week that we'll be talking a lot about as we head through the next several days. Beneath that upper-level wave, though, I just kind of backtracking now. I talked about the ridge across the region, but flattening that out with more zonal flow with embedded shortwave troughs within that flow, or short waves kind of embedded within that flow. Over the top of a very hot and humid air mass, a very unstable air mass, is going to set the stage again for kind of some explosive thunderstorm development as we head into the afternoon hours of the next several days. And you can see that here. We're looking at our forecast convective available potential energy. This is the fuel for those thunderstorms. And when we start seeing these pink, kind of gray and white colors here, this is extremely unstable air mass. This is very, a typical June, July air mass here with very volatile conditions, temperatures in the 90s, those dew points in the 70s, and you get some upper level support there in the form of a little shortwave. You kick off some thunderstorms here that can become very intense very fast, producing, again, all hazards of severe weather. We're talking about the most widespread, bringing damaging winds here today, this afternoon and evening, but very high moisture content. We could see some locally heavy rain with this as well. Now, as we head into tomorrow, let's take this into tomorrow afternoon, watching that severe weather threat shift to the south as the unstable air mass shifts to the south. Here it is, 3 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. Where are the hottest colors here? Well, it's from eastern Kansas into portions of the central Corn Belt here, right through central Missouri into central Illinois and Indiana. And again, that sets the stage kind of right on that gradient for kind of explosive thunderstorm development during the mid-afternoon and evening hours. And again, we'll be talking about that slight risk for severe storms from the eastern Corn Belt all the way into the northern plains on Wednesday afternoon and evening. Let's take it on into Thursday afternoon. We'll go ahead and just jump ahead. This model run here ends. This would be, there it is, noon on Thursday. And again, kind of creating a very volatile environment here across the Central Plains. Still have a boundary kind of draped across the Eastern Corn Belt, you notice right here. So not out of the woods here Thursday afternoon and evening for some thunderstorms to pop up kind of along that boundary between the cooler air mass to the north and the very unstable air mass off to the south. Again, a very moisture-laden air mass. This is going to be very typical for this time of year, but you can see, look at this percolating across the Gulf. That is our tropical depression, potentially making its way into the Eastern Corn Belt as we get into early next week. So let's dial it back. Let's look at the precipitation forecast here from the high-resolution NAM model. Again, we know that there are a couple clusters of storms across the northern plains early this morning, but we'll be watching this corridor from portions of southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, into central Wisconsin for thunderstorms to erupt during the mid-afternoon hours into the evening, and again, producing maybe a tornado or two, some large hail initially, likely progressing to a damaging wind threat as we head into the late evening, into the early overnight hours. As we head into the late overnight, midnight, into the early morning hours on Thursday, we could see a very isolated severe weather threat continue into northern Illinois, southern Michigan, maybe far northwest Indiana, but by and large, a lot of our high-resolution guidance has these thunderstorms beginning to die out as we head into the Wednesday morning hours. I think I just said Thursday. I mean Wednesday. As we head into Wednesday afternoon and evening, that frontal boundary dividing the very warm air mass to the south, the very unstable air mass to the south of that, and slightly cooler air off to the north. We'll see those thunderstorms erupting once again from northern Missouri into central Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, producing really going to be talking about, if anything, damaging wind gusts, I think, on Wednesday afternoon and evening, and maybe some locally heavy rain. These clusters of storms can be rather hard to forecast in detail in advance. Oftentimes they kind of create their own local environment here with their cold pools of outflow air, and that can begin to kind of guide the storms, can kind of determine whether or not they're going to continue to flare up, if they move into a favorable environment or not. And sometimes you get some very weird movement. The high-resolution NAM model trying to take this cluster of storms from the St. Louis area, start moving it kind of westward across portions of Kansas and Oklahoma overnight Wednesday. So a hard to pin down zone, and that's why we've got that slight risk across a huge area from the northern plains into the central and eastern Corn Belt associated with Wednesday's severe weather threat. Getting into Thursday, we'll again be watching for the severe weather threat to kind of reignite across this region. We'll have time to talk about that a little more in depth with our Thursday morning forecast. Now we'll look a little bit more, broad brush with the European model. This will take us a little bit further into the weekend as well. Again, we'll watch for that threat for severe storms to erupt across Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin this afternoon and evening, dying out as they move off to the southeast during the overnight. On Wednesday afternoon and evening, watching for clusters of storms to once again erupt from portions of Kansas and Nebraska, across Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, with the risk for severe weather and locally heavy rain there as well. And then as we take it on into Thursday, watching for the chance for thunderstorms, greatest threat for severe weather across the Central Plains, but still, remember I pointed out that boundary being kind of stalled across this region, heads up, still across portions of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, down into Kentucky and Tennessee Thursday afternoon into Thursday night. And then as we get into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we're going to continue to keep at least the chance for clusters of storms across the central and eastern Corn Belt. But as we head into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, I think we'll be talking about a much better threat for severe weather across the northern plains as that next area of low pressure begins to eject across the region. So total precipitation between now and Sunday evening, very disorganized. Again, hard to pin down. The heaviest amounts here are going to come across an area that will also see quite a bit of dry conditions. So locally heavy precipitation possible here, especially Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening into Wednesday night from portions of the Kansas City area across northern Missouri into Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And then across the northern plains, really a smattering of precipitation where the precipitation is going to be much more isolated in nature. We're not talking so much about clusters of storms as we are talking about isolated thunderstorms across that region. So when we look at this, the next 5 days, our precipitation in terms of a departure from normal, now we're looking at just the raw output from the European operational model. So this is not an ensemble forecast. So you're seeing some details here that are not going to exist exactly as they're being portrayed, but you can kind of pick out the pattern here. And overall, we're seeing Again, we've got primarily ridging across the region, so it is by and large a drier pattern, but with these frontal boundaries, the outflow boundaries, we'll get some locally heavy precipitation out of that. And the best chance, I think, for the locally heavy rain is going to be from maybe Kansas City into northern Missouri, across central Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And I think that's largely going to be associated with the Wednesday afternoon, evening into Wednesday night, potentially Thursday precipitation threat and the thunderstorm threat. As we look back across the northern plains, the European model is a little bit less gung-ho with the heavy rain threat than, say, the GFS. Now, we're looking at the exact same thing here from the GFS model, the precipitation forecast here in terms of a departure from normal. And again, you see the scattered opportunity for locally heavy rain here across the eastern Corn Belt here from Kansas City on across the eastern Corn Belt, but a little more gung-ho with the rain threat here across the northern plains with that severe weather threat primarily over the weekend into early next week. One more way of looking at this, we're looking at the ensemble forecast probability of an inch or more of precipitation. We look at the European model, we see that corridor from Kansas City into the eastern Corn Belt. We look at the GFS, we see that exact same corridor with slightly higher probabilities, but when you look at the European model, not quite as gung-ho across the north as, say, the GFS. So this would be something to watch here as we head through the weekend, kind of watching the evolution of that second bigger trough that makes its way in through the weekend. And part of the reason for the difference here, the European model is a little bit more gung-ho with the moisture return being stunted by the tropical depression here across the Gulf of Mexico. That could work to kind of keep moisture locked in across the Gulf. Now it's June. It's obviously not dry across the Corn Belt. We already have dew points in the 60s and 70s, but the GFS kind of leaving things more open for better moisture transport toward the northern plains, that higher risk for heavy precipitation, whereas the European model kind of suppressing things to the south and thus suppressing things off to the north. So let's pay attention to this as we get closer to the weekend, as we kind of try and understand really the significance of some of the rainfall chances off to the north, and associated with that, the widespread or volatile nature of the severe weather threat as we head to the weekend as well. Some questions to be answered across that region. Also questions to be answered, just to give you a heads up on Tropical Depression number 3. This is certainly not set in stone. We've got at least 5 days to go, if not just a little bit longer, but some of our ensemble forecasts definitely honing in already on a potential track here that would take it through the Gulf of Mexico northward into portions of the mid-Mississippi Valley and then eventually the eastern Corn Belt. And should that happen, that would certainly be, a pattern-defying heavy rainfall event for some, depending on where the track is going to be. Again, with a ridge across the continental U.S., that should be a drier pattern across that eastern Corn Belt. But certainly a tropical disturbance making its way in here would create some uncertainty within that. Temperatures across the region going to continue to be warmer than average. We'll see a shot of slightly cooler air as we head into the weekend and early next week across the Great Lakes and the eastern Corn Belt, but that quickly is replaced by this ridge. Again, this is the background state as we head into early next week, one that would allow for much more warmth across the region, but we do have to talk about the potential for that little wild card sneaking up from the south. So your high temperatures for the next several days, again, hot and muggy for the day today, mid-90s across a huge corridor from the Central Plains into the Great Lakes, and that's going to be associated with dew points in the 60s and 70s, creating very hot and humid conditions across the region. A little bit cooler tomorrow. This is largely a byproduct of clouds and precipitation becoming more widespread across the region. Thursday, still seeing much in the way of mid-80s to lower 90s across the region. Friday, Saturday, you start to see that cooler air mass try to make its way in here. You see in some 60s and 70s across the Great Lakes, but it does not last long. As we head into the back half of the weekend into early next week, we're going to start to see this warmer air mass across the high plains begin to once again expand to include much of the Corn Belt. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow morning.